What if I told you that some of the biggest names in WWE history never needed your cheers to become unforgettable? And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why these superstars built entire legacies on being hated, and why turning them into heroes would have actually ruined everything you came here to see. In WWE, there are always those performers who feel destined to be loved. The kind of superstars who walk out, soak in the cheers, and naturally slide into the role of the hero. But then there's a completely different breed, the ones who don't just play villains, they are villains at their core. The kind of performers who make crowds uncomfortable, angry, even furious, yet somehow you still can't look away. These are the wrestlers who never truly became babyfaces, not because they couldn't, but because they were simply too perfect as heels. And once you really look at their careers, you start to realize something important. Not everyone is meant to be cheered. Some are meant to control the entire atmosphere by being the one person everyone wants to see lose. Starting things off, Gunther is the kind of presence that instantly changes the feeling in the arena the second he appears. There's a weight to everything he does, like the match has already become more serious before it even begins. And honestly, it doesn't take long to understand why he's reached that level. This is the man who held the Intercontinental Championship for a record-breaking 666 days. But that number alone doesn't tell the full story. What really made that reign special was how consistently dominant he was throughout it. Match after match, Gunther delivered performances that felt brutal, precise, and unforgettable. He didn't just win, he dismantled people. And because of that, many fans genuinely consider him one of the greatest Intercontinental Champions of all time. But here's the key detail. He never needed to be a babyface to earn that respect. In fact, the reason his character works so perfectly is because he has always been a heel. From his earlier days in Europe to NXT UK and eventually WWE's main roster, Gunther has always carried himself like a cold, calculating force. His presence, his strikes, his demeanor, it all feels designed to make him the nightmare opponent. Even when fans began to admire him, that didn't suddenly make him a hero. It just made him a respected villain. And that's a very different thing. Then you look at someone like Roode, and it becomes even clearer why some characters just don't translate to the babyface role. The ravishing persona wasn't just arrogant, it was deliberately obnoxious. He strutted to the ring like he believed he was better looking than anyone in the building, and he didn't hesitate to push boundaries by openly flirting with women in the crowd, often crossing lines that made audiences instantly dislike him. And that was the entire point. Roode wasn't meant to be cheered. He was designed to get under your skin. During the Golden Era, he was one of those villains people loved to hate. He had the charisma, the confidence, and the in-ring ability to back it all up. His Intercontinental Championship win over the Ultimate Warrior proved that he could operate at a high level, and their rivalry created some of the most memorable moments of that time. But no matter how talented he was, there was never a real push to make him a hero. Because why would there be? He was already perfect at what he did. Moving forward, Sherri Martell stands out as one of the most unforgettable female heels in WWE history. She didn't just play a villain, she embodied chaos. Everything about her performance felt intense and unpredictable. The screaming, the facial expressions, the energy she brought to ringside, it all added a level of tension that few others could match. Whether she was aligned with Randy Savage, Ted DiBiase, or Shawn Michaels, Sherri always found a way to stand out. She never faded into the background. Instead, she amplified every moment. And even when she stepped into the ring herself, there was never a sense that she could suddenly become a relatable hero. She was too sharp, too aggressive, too naturally suited to being the villain. Then there's Bull Nakano, a name that immediately brings to mind dominance and intimidation. Long before arriving in WWE, she had already built a reputation in Japan as one of the most fearsome competitors in women's wrestling. Her look, her presence, and her intensity made her feel like a legitimate threat every time she appeared. So when she entered WWE, there was really only one way to present her, as a dominant heel. Her rivalry with Alundra Blaze is still remembered as one of the standout highlights of that era's women's division. At a time when women's wrestling wasn't always given the spotlight it deserved, Bull Nakano still managed to deliver matches that felt competitive and meaningful. Interestingly, by all accounts, she was a kind person behind the scenes, but inside the ring she was something completely different, and that's what made her special. Looking at Kong Bundy, you see another example of someone who was built to be a monster. In the 1980s, he was presented as a destructive force, a giant whose sole purpose was to crush anyone in his path. That role naturally placed him opposite Hulk Hogan, the ultimate babyface of that era. Their clash at WrestleMania 2 inside a steel cage was a defining moment. Even though Bundy didn't win, he didn't need to. His role was to be the obstacle, the final boss that the hero had to overcome. And that's where he stayed for most of his career. Even later, when he faced The Undertaker, the dynamic didn't change. He was always the threat, never the hero. When you get to Wade Barrett, things become a bit more interesting, because on paper, he had everything needed to be a babyface. The look, the voice, the presence, it was all there. But somehow, everything about him just worked better as a heel. From leading the Nexus to his later runs, Wade Barrett always carried a sharp, confrontational edge that set him apart. As the front man of Nexus, he wasn't just another wrestler. He was positioned as a disruptive force, someone who challenged authority and brought chaos wherever he went. That early portrayal left a lasting impression, shaping how fans viewed him for the rest of his career. Even when his character evolved and he moved into different storylines, that same intensity and commanding presence never really faded. Barrett had a natural ability to sound authoritative, whether he was delivering a promo or simply standing in the ring. His voice, his confidence, and his overall demeanor made it difficult to see him as a traditional hero. Even in moments where he wasn't fully positioned as a villain, there was always an underlying tension to his character. And when he transitioned into commentary, that tone followed him. His analysis often carried a slightly critical, no-nonsense edge, reinforcing the idea that his identity has always been tied to that villainous energy. Then there's David Otunga, whose case highlights how much presentation can influence perception. Otunga had a polished, almost flawless image, well-spoken, confident, and composed. But that perfection is exactly what made him come across as slightly unlikable to some fans. It wasn't that he was doing anything wrong, rather everything about him felt just a bit too calculated, too put together. That kind of character naturally leans toward being a heel. Whether he was part of a faction or standing on his own, Otunga consistently gave off that same vibe. Even after stepping away from in-ring competition and moving into an analyst role, that composed, confident presence remained. It's a reminder that in WWE, sometimes it's not just what you do, it's how you carry yourself that defines your character. Then there's Jazz, who brought a completely different kind of intensity. During the Ruthless Aggression era, she stood out as a physically dominant force. Her matches felt hard-hitting and serious, and she carried herself like someone who wasn't there to entertain, she was there to win. Her rivalries with Trish Stratus and Lita highlighted that perfectly. She wasn't flashy or overly charismatic in a traditional sense. Instead, she was direct, aggressive, and intimidating. And that made her incredibly effective as a heel. With Maryse the situation becomes almost obvious. From her entrance to her attitude, everything about her character leaned into arrogance and confidence. She carried herself like someone who knew she could command attention, and instead of using that to win people over, she used it to provoke them. Her partnership with The Miz only reinforced that. Together, they became one of WWE's most naturally effective heel pairings. Their dynamic worked because neither of them needed to pretend to be liked. When you talk about legendary heels, the Iron Sheik absolutely belongs near the top. He didn't just play a villain, he generated genuine anger from the crowd. At a time when wrestling relied heavily on clear good versus evil storytelling, Sheik was the perfect antagonist. His victory over Bob Backlund wasn't just a simple title change, it marked the beginning of a whole new era. That moment helped pave the way for the rise of Hulk Hogan, who would go on to become one of the biggest names in WWE history. Even though his championship reign was short, its impact was massive. He served as the perfect bridge between generations, connecting the old-school style to a new, larger-than-life era. As a villain, he was so effective that fans were emotionally invested in seeing him lose, and that's what made his role so powerful. And then there's Bobby Heenan, the ultimate example of someone who never needed to be a hero to achieve greatness. As a manager, Heenan was in a league of his own. His intelligence, sharp wit, and flawless timing made him one of the greatest minds the wrestling business has ever seen. He didn't need to step into the ring to leave a lasting impact. His presence alone could change everything.